Hi, so the institution's back again, committee of conference with our house counterparts. And just trying to get down to something we can all agree with. Madam Chair, I think on this sheet right here, as long as Damien can get the language to us, I think we can agree to what you had asked us to do as far as on that.
Everything on the sheet.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything that was too harmful. I mean, you didn't really ask to change much other than to clarify stuff, and we're good with that. I mean,
So what have you decided for the reentry facility language? Is that for all, all?
well, I don't see why we wouldn't do that if we're gonna have reentry. I mean, in today's world where we're all concerned about gender neutrality and all that, why wouldn't we just have one policy for gender, for reentry? I mean, why do we want to favor one over the other? So if we can, if you got language for that to,
I can do that.
I mean, I think we all know the points of where it is. We want to be, all those points that we have, we want to make sure that it's close to everything and that we've talked about and agreed to.
So, let me ask what makes the most sense for the committee right now. I can do a couple of different things right now. I can start a working draft, which has just the agreed to language on it and placeholders and sections where you haven't agreed. Or I can add a third column to the side by side. I'll start anything that you don't have a dispute on going into this, I'll eliminate those sections and just say same. And then where you've agreed to new language or there's new language pending, I'll add that in the third column. You can review it there. Once you agree to it, I'll close that out and then we'll slowly shrink the sheet down.
Maybe we'll be done in 5 minutes.
Maybe not. Can I just say something about the reentry?
Yes.
I think it's a really good idea to use this language for both, and because there are some things in this language that we didn't have in the other. Just the level of security is really important, and the design that's distinct from a correctional facility, I think that's important. And then continual access to service and supports. I wish that everyone in the system had that. But not, that would be a nice goal. But I think this is very helpful and designed in a flexible manner. I think this is really good language.
Thank you.
So maybe just start at the top. So the $100,000 for the tables and chairs, you made the point, Madam Chair, about it being sergeant at arms. So we don't risk any sort of FEMA issue, and I think we're fine with that. We had it under BGS.
No, we haven't.
It got moved in
No.
Senator Probst.
No, it is not. We went to Sergeant of Arms.
Went to
Yeah, it's at Sergeant at Arms.
Sergeant of
I
Arms.
think
It's already
we're
there.
fine on.
Right.
Yeah, that was a correction that came to Senate appropriations from JFO.
And then you were okay with section 16, 17, 18, and 21A.
Yeah,
And we're talking now about the next piece, the proposed language.
yeah, and we corrected the considering versus
Correct.
the actual
Making it a requirement.
requirement,
Yeah.
right? We're fading. That's that time after.
Yeah, just so they're parallel.
Right,
Right. Yeah. And we reverted back to the House language on another subsection.
At the end of subsection B of 27.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think we're okay with 28.
Mhm.
Yep.
And the last piece there is the definition. So
That's what we just talked
Yeah.
about as far as to work on that. If Damien can find some, the language, we all agree to.
Well, we have it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
and it will be
that
male
is-
and female.
Yeah, that's the current working language there. So far, no notes of changes or anything like that in the administration.
I guess one question I have on this is, we have the other language that we're using for citing of reentry facilities, like is being.
Yeah, this doesn't affect that. So this is what we mean when we say a reentry facility.
Okay,
And then what we're saying is cite what we've described here at a place that is proximate to transportation, the workforce,
Great, okay, so
services and supports, et cetera.
there's not a conflict between this.
No,
Great, thank you.
yeah, and that's actually part of the drafting thinking behind this too, is because you've already said that they work together to create the full picture.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We haven't heard anything back from DOC about this either, so. And we've sent them 2-3 times.
Well, didn't it,
So I passed it on to, Kate has passed it on to DOC. I don't know, I haven't been in touch with DOC directly.
But they've seen more.
I know that they have notes on the language. I think they wanted to get more input from their staff before they responded. I just touched them that you're very close to finalizing it.
Yeah, well, it's not changing statute. It's section law. And it's connected to the women's reentry, the new facility, and it's connected to anything we look at for male reentry. So it's not by statute. It's only section law. So.
Would you like them to zoom in if they want to be heard?
Or emails.
Well, I think they just gotta give us a nod to whether they can agree with the language or not.
Yeah, they just sent us, I do.
Yeah, they haven't posted
Is
it.
it as you sent it to me or as it to you?
No, it says I sent it to you,
Okay.
so.
We're doing the best we can. We're on a short time frame to
Right.
get this done. So did you folks have anything else?
Well, I mean, we're gonna wanna stick with the, you know, where we were on the former prison site. We're gonna stick to where we had made that decision as far as no dollars or tearing down buildings as far as that. And we wanted to kind of stick with we just really would like to start fresh next year with language as far as on that, as far as naming, buildings, and going and being a lot more in depth than what we are. I think that if that is something that, again, you don't ever want to assume. But as chair of this committee, I'm really not in favor of, putting any of that language off. It's a hard decision to make. As chair, I'd like to be part of that, and I think that if we could sit down next year again, assuming that everybody's back in the same capacity, that we could get all the stakeholders together and come up with something big.
Who would be the stakeholders?
I think it needs to be everybody that might have, but I think it needs to be, again, if you and I are in the same position, it certainly needs to be you and I. It needs to be the BGS, it needs to be the administration, it needs to be, the Friends of the State House, it needs to be the Friends of the Capitol Complex, there, needs to be maybe Joint Legislative Management Council, it needs to be a big group that we should sit down and that way we just get past these decisions as far as, we know how it's been, it has been uncomfortable at times about, you know, how we name things, and it seems to be sometimes a popularity contest, which we don't want it to be. I do agree that there needs to be a firm, there should be just a firm policy about where you name state buildings. The people that want us to name a building after, Governor Hoff, which, you know, they're very deserving people, and he's a past governor. But they're asking us to name buildings, and within a circle of buildings that have never been named after anybody. And there's been an unwritten rule that that's not what happened, but who made that rule? Did Chair Evans make that rule? Did Chair Ingles make that rule? No. Did you guys make that rule? No. I think it needs to be that we sit down and we make those rules. We sit down at all the stakeholders and sit down and do the jobs that nobody else has wanted to do. And that's how I can't believe that.
So would it help if we had someone give us thoughts, terms between, we come back next year with some thoughts in terms of what that process of naming the building should look like?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
that would be different than this study?
Yeah, it would be, actually,
It would be this kind of.
it would be more about, instead of naming people who involved, who should be involved? Who should have a say? Who should be sitting at the table? Yes, I think that is going back to square one, right down to ground one, and not making any assumptions about anything, just starting fresh, okay? Again, like I said, it's been the unwritten rule, you don't name buildings in the Capitol complex. Well, maybe we just need to go beyond that and start right at the beginning and say, here's where we're gonna start. And let's bring everybody in and when we leave this room, no matter how long it takes, if it's a week, if it's 10 weeks, if it's whatever, we're gonna have a consistent policy about how we name buildings within the state of Vermont. We also have to look at this, another thing that we're running into now with 108 Cherry Street. We have the families named on there right now. Now we don't have the building anymore. Who made the decision that, okay, forever and a day, now we gotta go find a new building for that? We should have a policy about that. When there's no longer a building, do we have to carry that name further to another building? Or maybe we don't even name them after buildings, maybe we just put a plaque on the building in itself. But I think there's just a lot of different ways to do this that has never been handled correctly, and I think that if we start from square one, forget about what we think we know, start over, we can do a better job.
Well, I think we do want to start from square one, not slow, sorry, Jeff. They come after the process, but we need that whole.
Not this study, that was the purpose of the study.
Right, they come back with the
Well,
process. so
the
we
problem
know
is, who you guys have picked don't wanna do it.
Nobody wants, when we heard testimony, we brought in the transportation board.
Right.
Currently, right now, the Department of State Libraries names geographic areas.
Yeah.
And they have a little bit of a process, and we listen to the state librarian. We also brought in the chair of the transportation board. And they have a more distinct process, in fact, they have to go through ruling,
Airports and stuff.
it is roads and bridges.
Okay.
Because, and that request came from the Senate Transportation Committee quite a while ago. And John Zacconi was chair of the T board.
Yeah.
He came in. and-
Who's the staff of this T board? Cause I'm on the T
I
board.
thought he was chair. He was chair. His name is-
He's the staff, yeah,
Executive
yeah,
director.
yeah.
My problem, but he was very, very clear. He said, you wanna give it to people that don't want it. Then it doesn't become this,
Mm.
because they didn't want it. He said, we didn't want it. You don't want anything to do with it. And he said, that's what works, because you don't have the vested interest in the slant one way or the other. And he really went through the process that they had. They have and the librarian, also state librarian went through. They both have a process of and if anyone wants to name a geographic area or road and bridge after someone, there's a petition process. It goes to that state board, transportation board. And they have to make their case, why there's a nexus. They have, like the library, they have, I think, the person has to be deceased for 5 years. I'm not sure if the T board is like that. They set up that structure.
Right.
And the one thing that John Spony also said is the one thing you really need to be clear, whoever's doing this, that there is something they can hang their hat on, they have to say no. So the process has to be really fair, has to be very clear, and you need to give it to entities that don't want it, because then it's fair.
I don't believe
So
that.
that's what we were reacting to.
Because I would do that, I would wanna be involved with that. And I think I can be fair. And I think that you and I, as chairs of these committees who are responsible for all of these buildings, and you know, yes, I know that BGS does this or does that, but you know, us as chairs we're the ones making those decisions. And I think I would want to be part of that process, or I don't want to take that right away from another chair that's gonna sit there. I don't want to make that decision.
When we had the deli section in the Capitol bill,
Yeah.
Mm.
the old deli section, we wanted to take that out of being political in terms of what party was in power, what party had the majority, what party was staffing the committees, because it was just turning into this, depending who was who,
Yeah.
where the projects were, who had clout in the building, who didn't, and we went into these building community grants program to take it out of our arena and depoliticize it so it's fair. And that it's spread out across the state in a fair basis. So we did that. And this is very similar. To name anything is very political, and it can be very emotional at the time. And it has to be a deliberative process, and I think you're absolutely right. You need a process in there. We haven't experienced this in terms of a building being sold that's needed. And how do you do that? Department of Libraries, they have a process for a geographic area, that all of a sudden the name is there and it's inappropriate,
Oh,
and
right.
they can change it. So we have to be aware of that, and that's what we're working on. Let's get some thoughts from some folks who aren't in the political world in terms of what that process should look like, and report back to us next January, so we can work through and set a process in place and figure out what entities should be the ones responsible to make those. That's what we're looking for.
That's interesting. So
We're
these
not
aren't-
saying those folks are gonna be the committee that are gonna name. We're
I
not
see what you're
that.
saying. Okay, that's helpful.
So could I ask, is the objection to the study committee itself over the summer or the composition or both? It's,
I think I don't think it goes far enough in naming who's gonna be involved. And, I don't think, I don't agree that it should be people who don't wanna do it. I think it should be people who do wanna do it. Why have somebody on there who doesn't wanna be part of it? I hear your point. But I think it ought to be people who want to come and come up with a solution that everybody's gonna be proud of, that everybody's gonna be happy with. That's gonna be fair and go on. I mean, so that's where it's at. One is, and another is we have no funding for it. There's no money in here. It's gonna cost money to do it. So, I mean, I think that's where it is. I think,
These are folks who are currently working over in the state anyway. So this was a recommend from the folks that we reached out to, Laura Trishman. In fact, she offered to do it. She said there's a nexus there with some being historic preservation, with some of these buildings. Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development was supportive of having a working group. And that's what this is. And we said, well, if you want to have a study group to figure out ideas in terms of what the process is and who and what entities need to come together to do that naming, give us that suggestion next January. Give us that process and the recommendation of who should be responsible for naming buildings under BGS's authority. And they sent us this list, which I gave to you.
Yep.
There would be the working group. So our language, what section was it? 14?
18 or section?
Pages. So if you look at our language, it's to create the study committee to develop a proposed process for naming the state buildings under BGS. It says what the powers and duties, they would develop the proposed process. And they would look at entities within state governments other than the General Assembly for naming of the buildings. And who should be involved in determining whether to name specific buildings. And then
it goes to that.
Yeah. Methods by which municipality or general public may petition to name a building, because municipalities may be involved here. Any requirements for historical nexus, the process for considering a petition to name a building, and they need to report to our committees, our two committees by January 15 on their proposals and any recommendations for legislative action. So it gives us a head start to do our work that Senator Ingalls would like us to do next year.
At no cost.
well, there are
That's
the
why
employees.
Right, so no
It's-
additional cost. They would
Right,
do
it's
this
a
as part
study
of their work.
committee. Originally, we thought well, maybe these folks could be the committee. And the pushback we got was we don't have the capacity. So we said, okay, we'll have you as a study group in terms of what Laura Trishman, the Secretary of ACCD, had recommended. So we're keeping it a study group. Come back to us come January and report to us what the proposed process would be and who the entities should be that names it. And then we will work on that next session. Our two committees.
Would you, just a couple questions, cause it's helpful for me to have the reasoning behind this and the detail. Did you discuss making a distinction between the Capitol complex and other state areas?
We talked about that, and in one of our drafts, we did state that. But we, did eliminate that.
It does make sense to me to have
Well, I think it,
a
I think,
separate,
again, what I'm not in favor of is getting ahead of the ball. And I think that is what getting ahead of the ball. Those aren't the decisions that they ought to make. It ought to be the study group that actually makes those decisions. And,
Yeah.
so what
and the study group could make that decision.
they could, but not this group, not this group here. No, because they're not the ones. They are the task, if I'm understanding what Madam Chair is saying, this isn't the study group. These are the people trying to put the group together to do the study. And that's where I could get to. I could get to this. Okay, we're not taking recommendations from these folks here, where they are putting the study group together, and this is a group that should get together, and this is how they should go forward with it. Because again, they should be asking a lot more people that are here. If you want to start with this group, that's fine. But the other people that should be involved, again, should be the people that have been here historically for a lot of years, making decisions. The people that made decisions around the Capitol complex, the people that made decisions within this building. And we've met a lot of those fine people when we were doing confirmations last year that have been here a lot longer than we have. I don't know why David Sheets wouldn't be on here. I don't know. I think because I think he ought to be. And there's just a lot more people that should have a say in what goes on. And if you want to put a committee together to figure out, okay, these are the people that should be involved, then I can get with that. But as far as this group right here being the ones to actually start to do the study, that's not, I'm not going there.
Well, if you look at the language, I think it does take that into consideration, Senator. If you look at the powers and duties, they need to come back. They need to develop which entities and individuals would be involved in determining whether to name specific buildings that are under BTS. They would make those recommendations to us, the legislators and the we would then decide, are those names appropriate, are those entities appropriate, or do we want to expand it, or do we want to eliminate some? It's covered there.
Yeah, it feels to me like this study committee is doing precisely what you want it to do. That's how I'm interpreting this language and what you're asking for. And it is this is called the study committee. They would be deciding who should.
Yeah, they don't actually decide anything, they just recommend.
A process to us.
Yeah, they're just coming up with a
And
suggestion.
who should be in charge of that process.
Right.
And I hear the conversation of, I mean, I'm hearing a primary reason why we don't want to enact this is because nobody wants to do it. That doesn't matter to me so much. I mean, in my job, my other job, I do things I don't want to do all the time. I have to do things I don't want to do.
But you don't have an outside group telling you that that's what you're gonna do.
Sometimes I do.
Well, then you shouldn't. So I get that. So
So,
why don't we find people who want to be involved?
well, that's where bias.
Why don't we put a feeler out instead of saying, okay, we want to put a study group together. Who wants to be involved? That's what I'd rather see. I'd rather see language.
We did that.
Well,
We did that. God sent you an email.
I can't even imagine that there's not 20 other groups who want to be part of this.
So we asked, and I gave you a copy. It is the email on March 4th. And we recommend the following participants. So you've got ACCD. You got the Historic Preservation, which they have the history of buildings. You have BGS because it's their buildings. You have the Historical Society because they deal with the history of the state of Vermont. You have the state librarian that deals with a lot of issues within the state, and they already named some buildings and with some geographic areas. You got the League of Cities and Towns because these buildings are in towns and they could have a say. And the Office of Racial Equity so that it is equitable across the state.
Where's the Sergeant of Arms? Where's Dave Sheets? Where's the Friends of the State House? Where's the Friends of the Capitol Complex? Where's the because they're all committees as well. And they have a lot more historical knowledge than what any of these people had.
So that could be a recommendation that this group gives us next January.
So what about the T-board? Did you ask them about being part of this?
No,
Because
because that
that,
might want to be,
Yeah.
and you want to expand it to.
so if other folks wanted to come to these meetings, yeah, are these public meetings,
Yes,
even though they're not elected people?
there could be any meetings in the state.
I don't know, sometimes if it's just staff, it wouldn't be. I mean, it would be good to say explicitly
just say
if
public
that they were
meetings.
public
Right.
meetings.
Mhm.
So then anyone could come.
We took quite a bit of testimony with these folks, and I think the thought was, they have experience doing this already, and there's some bumps in the road that we could avoid, by listening to them on, like threshold for petition signatures, how many do you want? Do you want it to be a campaign? Do you want it to be 25 just to get on the table? So there's a lot of things we can get out of the way, and then start the real talk when we re-adjourn here, have that out of the way.
I mean, would you be interested in having the transportation board?
I don't know that I would be. I think that would be part of the committee process, that once you determine who the committee is, could bring them people in for testimony and say, well, how do you guys make it work? And again, I'm not ready to agree that we ought to be in that type of debt. I could agree to getting a group of people together that are knowledgeable enough to put a group together to say, okay, this is who should be part of our study group. And I just don't think that we don't know, again, who doesn't want to be on it. Because we haven't reached out to them. And I think that there just needs to be more people that are involved, that has to say in the matter.
So we could add language that, the committee needs to have public meetings. Public meetings, and they need to reach out to stakeholders. Other entities that might be interested.
You could also look at this as like a preliminary study committee. I mean, we're not paying for this, which is good. And it would give some background information, just gathering data on how we already do naming, because it does get kind of tense when you're, when folks, just from being on the transportation board, people will sometimes want something to be named for their parent or their grandparent, and it gets awkward when that's just not appropriate. And there was something actually in Rutland where I think that, I don't remember which one it was, so that's good. But there was a different opinion of the town versus the family. So that gets very awkward. So I think it would actually be helpful, the more I'm listening to this, to have folks who are not elected just give recommendations. This group would have
Just
no.
because you're
Well,
elected
hold
doesn't
on.
mean that you can't be fair.
But what I'm trying to say is, this group has no authority at all. All they're doing is getting together, looking at how things get done and providing recommendations. Hopefully, they would provide, actually, I would say, provide alternate recommendations. So don't come down with just one opinion, but have varying opinions on how things could go, and the advantages and disadvantages of each recommendation. So I think this would provide a good,
I don't think
Start.
it doesn't include enough people.
well, anyone
start
who
the
comes
decision.
wants to come
I think
can
there needs to be
can
an
come.
effort to make it out there as far as who wants to be involved, not just who doesn't want to be involved.
Right.
Who wants to be involved, and there needs to be a reach out, and there needs to be you can get rid of half these people right here, and you can assign somebody to do this and say, okay, it doesn't even have to be this in depth. We're going to put a study group together. We're gonna name buildings. Who is going to go around and who is going to go ask all the groups and say, do you want to be part of this study? Do you want to do it? Do you want to be part? We do not want to exclude you if you want to be part. I agree that there ought to be definitely people in there to keep it whole again, so you don't start off on the wrong foot. One of them being the racial equity people. You need to make sure that they're at the table. You need to make sure that you don't start off making bad decisions right from the start. But there needs to be more people that are on this list. They need to be asked. This thing gets ahead of itself, and I don't have a problem with doing it. It's just, there's too many people on here already, and I disagree with you, Senator Harrison. that once you do make a committee, they do have some binding decisions that they make, because they say, oh yeah, well, we did this and this, that, and it does take a life of its own. So,
I don't think it has to, if, especially because the chairs of this committee are not on this committee. I mean, this is subordinate to these two committees, right? I mean, we're just asking, what do you think? And then, they'll come back and, Hopefully,
what happens when
like-
these folks make a decision and say, well, no, we didn't want them on there, we didn't want, oh, okay, we didn't want them on there.
what do you mean on?
On the study committee group, oh, we don't, oh, no, well, we didn't. ask them,
But
or we don't want
but
them
the
on there.
study committee, are they recommending who would be on?
They're gonna,
Okay, that would be number
I
two, so let's just look at number two, entities and individuals who should be involved in determining whether to name. Actually, that's just whether to name, that's not even naming. So are they? They would be looking at the process, I think it's great that you included municipalities as part of that. They're just looking at the process, public
Also-
notice, hearings. I
And
don't see that they're recommending specific members
No,
of
they're all-
whatever committee comes after this.
they're only recommending an entity within state government that would have the authority. And that could be broad, it could be local. So what I've heard is maybe add the board to the membership. Make sure they have public meetings.
I think the T-board can be after the fact as far as to, once the committee has been decided. Once we get there, then you can bring them in for testimony. What I wanna get to that I can agree to is that we get to a point to where we can name a study group, who's going to be involved. And it doesn't have to be in the depth as what we have right here. Who's gonna be involved? We need somebody, 3 people versus 7 people. We're gonna go around and we're gonna invite everybody in, and we're gonna put a study together group. Who should it be? And that's the type of language I'm looking for.
Adding a step that.
I think it's actually taking away steps.
So one thing that we did talk about was putting in language of this group would reach out to stakeholders that would be interested, so that you're spreading it out for more folks to participate. We did talk about that.
So,
So you have public meetings, and then you make sure that this study group, this work group, reaches out to a variety of stakeholders. So you're not limiting it to just these folks, but you're reaching it out to stakeholders to figure out what the process should be for naming state buildings that are under BGS.
And actually not even figuring it out, just coming up with multiple recommendations
Right.
for it.
They-
They have no authority.
Right, they have no
They
authority.
just are recommending.
Right.
So let me just suggest something, I don't know whether anyone was the appetite for this or not. Rather than put it in the capital bill. How about if the 2 chairs send out a letter to as many of those 7 people as you want, with the same expression of desire that they start getting together people that want to be part of this process and start meeting if they want to meet, and then come back with some sort of recommendation or recommendations when we convene again. In other words, just because it's in the bill, I don't know that adds, you can get the same result by maybe just doing it the other way.
Well, I think you gotta go to E. I don't know if that could be achieved, because E says that the historic preservation officer will call the first meeting. And the committee will select a chair from its membership.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that could be accomplished with a letter. or not.
I think it could be the start. I think we could get to that.
That would be a question for the administration, like whether or not they need this direction to have the meetings. Because these people are under the direction of the administration, many of them.
I was just trying to find a
But yeah, that's-
way forward that
Mhm.
accomplishes the same thing, but doesn't need to be.
I would love
like that.
to do something. What Senator Collmore just said, for you and I. Draft a letter,
I think it should come from the conference.
Sure.
to do that as well. I would be fine with that as well. But draft a letter and say, we're gonna put this study group together. who should be involved. And then, you know, we can get to the meeting part of it or whatever. I mean, you're gonna have to, you're not gonna just do it all in an email. But, starting that process right there, and that is language I can agree to.
Well, let's talk.
And Damien's not here.
No,
That's
James
all right.
is tired.
It's okay, I mean, we can,
Let's talk that. At this point, I think we just need to regroup.
Yeah, well, I wanted more, can I ask, I mean, I just wanted.
Yeah.
Some questions, so I'm trying to catch up on what's happening
With,
with the southeast
oh, what's it?
place. Because the folks that gave us the presentation, that was Tom Kennedy and a consultant that the regional commission had. And so there wasn't any developer.
No, they're trying to figure out, take steps, what to do to the properties so that we can take some steps, because the thinking was maybe do a public-private partnership there, we just don't know. And they're coming back, I think their report's gonna be done in a couple, 3 weeks, I think. And, you know, I know from previous conversations with BGS about this whole thing for the last 4 or 5 years, that even if we do sell it, we may be in a position to demolish. We've also worked with historic preservation because part of the concern was, can we demolish any of these buildings because of the historical aspect of it? And we checked with historic preservation 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. They said, you can tear down those buildings, but it needs to be documented in public records. So in historic preservation, I believe is starting to do that with BGS, to start documenting.
okay.
You know, like you got the barn, you got the silo, you've got a few of those buildings in there that are of historic value that may be demolished. You got some buildings that may be able to be used. We don't want to destroy those. We don't know if they can be used. But there are some buildings that are really starting to fall apart. And that's deterring folks from even being interested in this.
Maybe, nobody said that, nobody's come to us and said, we don't wanna buy that because there's too many buildings in disrepair. And until somebody's ready to come and make that statement to us, we're just assuming, or we're making assumptions. And then my thought again, and I said to this committee, I'm sure I've said it to the conference committee, is that in sales, in real estate sales, you don't sell anything until you have somebody willing to write a check and they come and make a proposal to you. And they'll say, tear down building A, B, and C, and we'll do this for you. And so we'll say, okay, well, okay, so you wanna, so then we go back and we figure out it's gonna cost us this much money to tear down buildings A, B, and C. Okay, so therefore, this is what we'll sell to you for. And so you're not really spending the money if you do this right. They're spending the money because you do the process through negotiation.
So we wanted to tear down the razor wire because some of the potential purchasers were saying the razor wire is the journey
Mhm.
to the project. Okay, so we said, go tear it down. Another developer came along, said, you know, I really like that razor
Yeah,
wire.
so right.
So
Exactly
that's,
right.
that's what you get into. So we have to start making some steps to figure out how to make this property market. One of the thoughts, the language stated in there is maybe moving some of the property to the wildlife management.
Yeah. Which we have language out of there for.
We also had agreed language between BGS and the Mount Scottney Regional Commission on the demolition language. We had agreed language. I sent BGS and I sent Tom Kennedy to the cafeteria to work out language. And they came back with the language we had in the cafeteria. They agreed to. And it was taken out of the folks. We want that language back. Because we had an agreement from the commissioner of BGS with Tom Kennedy about that language. And I wouldn't have put it in the bill if we didn't have an agreement. So we had agreement
So I just have some questions. So was it for particular buildings or was
There
it
was
to
some-
give them?
Yes,
Okay.
there was some thinking of some particular.
And did the VGS commissioner see it as financially beneficial to the state to do that at this point?
I can't answer that.
Okay,
Because we were having discussions in our committee in terms of how do we do this? And it was getting really complicated. I said to the two parties, go to the cafeteria and figure it out if you can. And they did, and they.
Unless they're willing to write a check, I'm not gonna agree to that. I'm just not. Not gonna do that. I'm not going to agree that just because two people got together without all the entity of the state involved, that's what they're gonna do. If they wanna come to us and say, okay, here's our check, here's our money, here's what we're willing to do. If you tear those buildings down, we'll pay this amount of money for it, we'll do that. But for us to sit there and say, just because this group over here, who has no vested interest in it, other than a conversation that says, tear down those buildings, and then we might do something. That's not how you do business, and I'm not doing that.
I do business in this building. Like folks who have different viewpoints, who come before our committee. And say, you really want something, go to the cafeteria and work it out if you can. And if you do, you stick by that agreement, and I respect that agreement, and I stand by it. And that's what I'm doing with the language that was agreed to by the commissioner, BGS, and Mount Scottney Regional Commission. They came back to us with that language that was agreed to by them. And when a handshake is a handshake, it's a handshake. And that's how I operate in this building. I expect other people as well to do the same thing. You know, the administration may want to sell that property, and that was the testimony we received, and they didn't talk about how they had that.
say what? Sorry,
They
what
had
was
the agreement with that language.
the administration had that?
The commissioner of DTS
Yes.
and Mount Scottney Commission agreed to that language. That was their language that they presented to us. And we put it in.
So,
We put it
okay,
in.
so that's the language, just to be clear, on section 16, right?
So I'm trying,
Yeah.
it's our 6.
You're 16. So it says in consultation. Permanent building and general service, consultation with the Mount Scottney Regional Commission, so not a developer, the regional commission.
Because they're the ones who are.
Because that's Tom Kennedy.
Yeah.
Shall determine the buildings at the former Southeast State Correctional Facility property that shall be prioritized for environmental remediation, demolition, salvage. The commissioner shall consider the impact of building demolition on future site development when determining which buildings to prioritize. Commissioner shall notify the chairs of buildings proposed. Okay, but just so the key one is the last, environmental testing and remediation, demolition, salvage, dismantling commenced during calendar year 2024.
Mhm.
So. I mean, have they made the list of,
There's some that they have worked on this.
and
And this was agreed to with that, those two entities working together.
They have no money to do it,
We
none
had-
whatsoever.
We had,
No, we don't have money.
we did.
No, we didn't have money because we had to use that money to go back to the $550,000 that you guys took for the match money for the agency of agriculture. Which you had $378,000 that's set in this, that's 2022, you had another $100,000 into that. But you took that money, no matter how you want to figure it out. I'm not saying that you specifically took it from the 550, but when we had to replace that 550, that money was gone. That money was absolutely positively gone.
We can find it.
so there's not a dollar amount on this.
There was, for the 478,000. They do folks zero.
So that wasn't just a leftover amount of money, that was a particular amount, that was for specific buildings.
Yeah, we heard from BGS.
We heard from BGS. We
So,
had three,
so they had a list, we just had a list.
and we had money in FY 22 that we put in for demolition. FY 22. So
You got $378,000 that is set there, which I get that.
we have
And then you put
400.
another $100,000 in it for $478,000 on it.
Mhm.
If you want language back in there, I will do A and B, but I'm not doing C. I'm not going to start environmental testing remediation. I'm just not doing it, Alice, not
Well,
tearing
you
down
have other
buildings.
conferees too.
Well,
But BGS is recommending this.
BGS made an agreement with Monmouth County Commission on this line.
And we did take testimony from Joe Asia about where you would start.
Oh, and we do have to maintain it, right? And the maintenance is 250,000, is that right?
we have other people on this side of the building in the Senate that do not want buildings torn down. And they have made it very, very clear to me. And they've made it very clear that they do not at any time want any buildings torn down. I'm sorry that you made that agreement, but it wasn't made on the Senate side. You made that agreement, and I respect that. But then you have to come to us and we have to make that agreement. And we have people on this side of the building that do not want those buildings torn down.
They don't have the practice.
No, that's not true either. They do not want buildings torn down.
Well, we got a problem with Windsor. We're gonna have to straighten that out. So
Can we do, sorry, I'm new, can we do, have witnesses in this, in a conference committee?
we could, yes.
Right.
Okay.
It's up to the conferees, you can call witnesses, you can run through multiple drafts. You guys have a roll call, yeah.
Already forgotten, probably already passed it.
So,
It already rang, so we don't think.
but yes, you can call witnesses, you can take testimony. Generally, there's very little of that because of the time pressure, but I have had a couple conference committees in the past. Particularly when you get compromise language where you get, you ask questions of them, does this work for you? Do you have proposed changes? We certainly did that with the liquor and lottery merger. As now the language. So it is possible, but you need to kind of decide how to use your time because as you can see, you're squeezing a half hour here, an hour there. So if you usually it's for a very discrete purpose.
We have to go up and vote.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, wow, okay.
Do you have a next meeting tonight?
We'll have to see where we go, but,